athlete walks onto the field to play, you want them to feel like they've arrived at the Olympic Games. And the look of the Games communicates that. For Vancouver 2010, it was all about trying to define a new Canada. You know, I think on an international stage, there's very much, for better or worse, a kind of stereotype of Canadians as lumberjacks, as, you know, beaver pelts, slinging, you know, like, do we just drink maple syrup? And I mean, we do. But we wanted to redefine what the new Canada was. So for us, the color palette reflected that rather than the traditional colors that you'd associate with Canada with red and white.
It was 6 designers who were pretty young, including myself. We'd never built anything anywhere near this scope.
Early on, we were really trying so hard to show ourselves off as being modern and progressive. But in so doing, I think things were starting to feel a little cold and the opposite of what we were trying to say about our country's national character being warm.
It kind of came to a little bit of a head for us when we took a field trip in North Vancouver. We were all taking photos of textures around us, and being a coastal city, there's a remarkable amount of different weather patterns that hit us at all times. There's kind of this constant, what we ended up calling transformation.
And we just felt like that's Vancouver and that is Canada. This is a place where everything's constantly changing. So we started to hand draw a lot and to work with curves, and that ended up being, if you look at anything, whether it was the podiums, the torch, the medals, we had curves and lines that connect back to the idea of sea and mountains that surround us.
Working from those foundational colors, we really then began to add a lot more elements into it.
There's these layers of texture, and then there's these little kind of what Leo, our design director, called spice, where there's icons from around Vancouver that are kind of transforming into bizarre things.
There is that dragonfly and the float plane, that combination of nature and technology coming together.
That look and that feel was the result of 6 or 7 minds just kind of coming together and building on top of each other. And for better or for worse, that's kind of what it looks like.
We were always inspired by the athletes. I think we made a real point of thinking about them every time we went to design something.
Hopefully, if we do our job right, we will inspire the athletes to try to achieve their best. We want it to be memorable. We want you to be able to close your eyes and remember what Vancouver looked like. Even if you can't remember the details, just the color or generally how it made you feel. When design works, it makes you feel. It creates an emotional connection. And ultimately, that's our goal.
There is absolutely something about when the torch relay arrives, everything just ignites full force.
Before I went to the Calgary 88 Games, my brother and sister and I used to run fake torch relays around our block in Kelowna, a small town in British Columbia here. So even before I went to the Olympic Games, I had this magic sense of the torch relay. And so when I became a lead designer on the torch relay and the torch, that was definitely a time and a moment where I felt like, yeah, like I've arrived. So the torch relay identity is where we started. Ultimately, it came out one evening when Leo, the design director, and myself were staying late at the office, jamming through these different sketches and different explorations. I had one where there was this white pathway that had our sea to sky colors on either side. And I had this flame coming off the top as if it was a flame at the end of this snow-covered pathway. And Leo said, well, what if this pathway was curved? And so it became a pathway with a flame at the end of it, but it also became a torch as well, a silhouette of a white torch. And so when we went to brief the industrial designers we're collaborating with, Bombardier, we had this foundation in place. One of the things that we loved was the Lillehammer torch had this flag flame where the flame exit hole is more vertical. I thought, wow, isn't that beautiful when the torch is lit and there's a runner? Our design director, Leo, would always bring us back to the DNA of the identity that we had created. I can remember him talking about the bottom of the torch. He was saying, you know, this should feel like a Canadian oar that's been, you know, worn down over time, like the bottom of a canoe oar. And you can see the bottom of the torch it's not a straight cut. So we looked at how we can bring the dynamic expression that was in our identity system. How could we bring this into a dimensional form? We wanted people to feel like it was a piece of the new Canada, of the new voice of the new generation. We knew it had to help inspire, hopefully, a nation. It's less about the thing, it's more about what that points towards. What does the torch point towards? It points towards the Olympic Games. What do the Games point towards? For a lot of us, it's about doing our very best at whatever we do.
It was probably the greatest feeling of my life when I was randomly selected of the 1,600 employees to be one of the torchbearers. Leo had come up to me and he put his hand on my shoulder and in a Spanish accent, he said, "Congratulations, you deserve this more than anyone." And I said, "Thank you." And that was the last time I ever spoke to him.
We unfortunately lost Leo just months before the games, very unexpectedly and tragically, and that was the biggest blow and test of our emotions and ability to keep going on. It was unimaginable, to be honest, but we also obviously felt we have to finish this job for him at the level of perfection that he demanded of everything, which was very high, and try to be inspired by what he had brought to the project.
Leo was a great leader because he was passionate, he had the energy, but most importantly, he was a friend. You know, on a human level, design is about human connections. It's about human connections with your audience. It's about human connections as a design team. And Leo was more of a friend than a boss. And I think that's what allowed our team to be successful, was that we had that camaraderie. And his passion and his determination for excellence was contagious. Like, it's not about a meal voucher. This has to be the best meal voucher we can make it. That is something I've carried with me in my life. It's not about just running the torch, it's everything around it. You have one moment, you have one chance, you have to make the most of it. So for me, running that torch was all about running the torch with Leo.